Good morning, everyone. My name is Neera Tandon, and I am the president of the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited about today's events and today's report. I wanted to have a special thank you to the group the organization we are co-sponsoring this event with, and really have worked with over the last year at the Center for the Next Generation, which is a newer organization that is really dedicated to ensuring that we're tackling those issues that really ensure that our next generation will be successful. And I can think of no better topic than today's. Today, the Center for American Progress and the Center for the Next Generation is releasing this joint report titled The Competition That Really Matters, which details the strategies of both China and India and other countries in investing in their young people to ensure that they are competitive and that their countries are competitive in the decades to come. We have a lot of conversation about economic competitiveness in our country and what to do to make our economy stronger today and in the future. And the Center for American Progress has devoted a lot of resources to that work. But we took on this subject because we recognize that other countries are not just looking at competitiveness today, but they're looking at competitiveness for the next several decades. They have real strategies that they've developed to do that. And front and center in those strategies is really looking at their human resources. And the area in which they can affect human resources the most is obviously the education of their children. Looking at children not only in public schools and public education, but in the pre-K years as well. And so when we think about competitiveness and we think about economic growth, we should recognize that other countries have an expansive view of that, and that really means their human resources and education as well. And that is at the heart of what this report is tackling. Both China and India have strategies to ensure competitiveness, and it really means increasing investments in young people, in schools, in pre-K, and also ensuring flexible policies for their families. And so we look forward to a good discussion today in which we were able to highlight those facts and statistics. But I would say that both parties have to ensure that they are stewards for economic growth in the long term. And that's why it's important for both parties to look at the issue of human resources in this time where we have a lot of heat, but perhaps not so much light around the policies that our country will take on in the next several decades. I want to say a few words about the authors of this report. We're very excited about its results, and it has been a long-term effort because, believe me, getting data from China and India is not such an easy task. And so I really want to thank Donna Cooper, who's a senior fellow here, Adam Hirsch, who's our economist, and Anne O'Leary at the Center for the Next Generation, who all co-authored this report. It is my task now to introduce Matt James, who is the president of the Center for the Next Generation, and who has worked on a whole range of issues that are critical to economic competitiveness, from education to healthcare, and who is an expert on so many of these issues, but also front and center puts the stake of puts at stake in his work, children and their needs. And so it's my great honor to introduce Matt James.
Good morning, everyone. This is a great day for us. This is a big day for the Center for the Next Generation. This is the release of our first really big report. And let me, first of all, thank Neera for her and John Podesta in the very, very early days when the Center for the Next Generation was operating literally in my family room. They were constant colleagues who helped me think through the issues about how to set up the center, how to get started, and we could not be here without their advice and their counsel, so thank you. Let me also thank Donna Cooper and Adam Hirsch for their hard work on this report. As Neera said, this was not an easy report to put together, very tough. The quality of the work is just absolutely fantastic, and we are proud to be releasing this today. And let me also thank my colleague, Anne O'Leary. Anne was one of the first big hires at the Center for the Next Generation. I went home that day and said to my wife, oh my gosh, I think I just hired the smartest person I've ever worked with, and I've worked with an awful lot of smart people. And Ann has been just a terrific colleague and friend, and we're just at the beginning of the work we're going to be doing at the Center for the Next Generation. Let me just quickly explain what the center is about. It's a partnership between me, Tom Steyer, who is a businessman in California, head of Fairlawn Capital Management, and also his brother, Jim Steyer, nationally known children's advocate who started Children Now, Common Sense Media, and a number of other organizations. And we came together to try to make a new organization that will be focused on the primary issues that are going to affect the next generation of young Americans. Our first program areas are advanced energy and sustainability and children and families issues. And we operate both here on a national basis, but also in our home state of California. And the way to think about us is it's kind of a strategic communications organization, which will be trying to frame these big issues with partners like the Center for American Progress, but also as an organization that will be producing excuse me, some of the very best policy and research material. Let me also thank, as we're giving thanks at the beginning, our bipartisan polling team of Celinda Lake of Lake Research, represented here today by Jonathan Voss, and also Bob Carpenter of Chesapeake Beach Consulting, for their work in putting together a fascinating voter survey that accompanies this report. It's clear from this survey that Americans want their political leaders to be focusing on education and global competitiveness. Governor, no surprise, they actually want governors to spend a lot of time thinking about this. You know that. And it's clear that this is an issue that after the next set of elections, they're hoping there will be a strong focus on. So we're here today to focus on what we think is the nation's greatest asset, our young people, and what the future holds for them in the face of intense new challenges from China, India, and elsewhere. Those countries are aggressively expanding opportunities for their young people to the degree that they will have millions more people than we will competing for the best jobs in an increasingly competitive global economy in just a very few years. So what are we going to do about it? How can we maintain the competitiveness of the United States? Our report, The Competition That Really Matters, tries to put these challenges into perspective. Here are just a few of the key findings. China and India have embarked on an ambitious program to prepare more of their young people for the challenges and well-paying jobs of the global marketplace. Here are some stark numbers. By 2030, China will have 200 million college graduates, more than the entire U.S. workforce. By 2020, India will be graduating 4 times as many college graduates as the United States. Now, part of this disparity is obviously related to the sheer human capacity of China and India, each with populations 4 times greater than the United States. But it's more than just those numbers of people. China and India are investing in their future more than ever before, while the United States is just fighting to keep up. And frankly, we're doing a poor job in this country of ensuring that we educate and train all of our young children who want to compete for the great jobs that are going to be coming in the global economy. The United States, with a much smaller population than China or India, cannot afford to squander the talents of our young people if we hope to compete. Now, it's well known that the United States doesn't perform as well as students in other developed countries in standardized tests. That's not news. Out of 34 developed countries measured, we are 14th in reading, we're 25th in math. What is less well known is that if you compare reading scores of students only from our wealthiest schools, they would outperform students from all 34 countries measured. But students from our poorest schools would rank 33rd, trailing only Mexico. And if you look at mathematics, all of our students from wealthy and poor schools are basically emulating my mathematics academic record, which was mediocre. So what exactly are China and India doing to prepare more of their young people to graduate from college and thrive in the workforce? 3 things. First, they start early. By 2020, China will provide 70% of its children with 3 years of preschool. India plans to increase the number of children entering school ready to learn from 26% to 60% by 2018. While in the United States, half of our children receive no early childhood education, and we lack a national strategy to increase enrollment. Secondly, they educate their young people for the jobs of the future, especially in the critical needs of science, technology, engineering, and math. China is already graduating over 1 million college graduates a year in the areas of science, technology, and mathematics, while the United States graduates fewer than half that number. What we're doing now is clearly not enough, and imagine what will happen in the years to come if investments in our children continue to decline. Thirdly, They ensure that their students are taught by highly effective teachers. China is improving the quality of teachers even as the number that they are training explodes. The number of teachers with bachelor's degrees has increased 66% in just 8 years, with almost 2/3 of primary school teachers having an advanced degree. Our teaching corps is filled with degree professionals, but it is not attracting the best and the brightest on average. In the United States, on average, high school students who choose to enter undergraduate programs for education have SAT scores in the bottom third of all students tested. Now, this stands in sharp contrast to nations with impressive student results, such as Finland, which I know Neera is taking a close look at, which successfully recruit teachers from their top high school graduates. So if we're to make a commitment, make the commitment our competitors are making, we need strong political leadership to move forward, and the will to make education a national priority again, which we have done in the past. So for today at least, luckily, we don't have to look very far to find strong political leadership and commitment to improving education. I'm honored now to turn the podium over to Jack Markell, Governor of Delaware. He's a champion of children. Governor Markell is a national leader in the areas of school reform. He is chair of the National Governors Association, and he's the co-chair of the Common Core Standards Initiative, and he led Delaware's efforts to win the race to the top competition. Governor Markell, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I want to thank Matt and the Committee for the Next Generation, as well as Neera and CAP. I really believe that this is the defining issue of the day, and I think this is really just a terrific report. The fact is, businesses have more choices than ever about where they're going to locate jobs. The folks at Gallup tell us that there are 3 billion people in the world looking for jobs, and there are 1.2 billion jobs available. 3 billion people looking, 1.2 billion people available. So we are truly in a global war for jobs, which really means that we're in a global war for talent, because the jobs are going to go where the talent is. And the numbers, as Matt just showed in this report, are absolutely stunning in terms of the investments and the results that India and China, and they're not the only two, but the results that they are achieving. And so this report outlines the need for a comprehensive national strategy. And in the absence of such a movement, we've got, I believe, some incredible work underway in our state that I'd like to share with you today. So there are several efforts underway in Delaware that begin to address the competitiveness challenge. And it really starts with the recognition, at least a belief on my part, that what we've been doing in our country over the last many years is the academic equivalent of having our kids learn to play basketball by shooting in an 8-foot basket. And you know, you can get very good shooting in an 8-foot basket. The problem, of course, is when you get into a game and you're competing against players who have been shooting in a regulation basket, which is 10 feet. Now, the reason I say this is because every state's required under federal law to administer a state standardized test. These tests don't have to have anything to do with each other from one state to the next. They don't have to measure the same things. They don't have to use the same measurement scale. And so what we end up with as a result is something akin to what Garrison Keillor talked about in Lake Wobegon, where every kid is above average. And in fact is, if you look at the results of these state tests and you compare them to the NAEP, the national, what's called the nation's report card, or to the international test, PISA, the results on these state tests tend to be higher. Well, if you tell a kid that they're proficient based on a test that's administered only within their borders, but then they have to go compete for college and jobs with people who are not from within their borders, you're not being very honest with them. And I believe that a dose of honesty is in order. So one of the very first things that we did in our state, shortly after I took office, is we raised the bar. And we literally said to parents and teachers and students across our state, is that even though kids don't know anything less than they knew before, fewer of them will be judged to be proficient. That's not a very popular message to deliver. But again, we thought it was one that was important and one that we thought was honest. So number one, we're raising expectations for students with higher standards and with a world-class curriculum. We're also providing high-quality early childhood opportunities, especially for the highest need students. We're striving to transform the education profession with more meaningful evaluations and professional development, and we're using data in a whole new way. And I want to touch on each of these briefly. So let me start about raising expectations. And when it comes to raising the bar for all students, beyond raising the bar of what it means to be proficient, we also focused on the adoption of Common Core, and we thought that that was a necessary first step, and I had the privilege of serving with the former Republican governor of Georgia, Sonny Perdue, as a co-chair of that effort. The Common Core standards are a set of fewer, higher, and clearer standards that will increase instructional rigor and make it easier for states to share resources. Now, in Delaware, we're focused on making sure that all educators understand how instruction should change with Common Core, and we're developing systems and accountability to make sure that those shifts are underway. This, by the way, is very difficult work. It was difficult enough to get all the states to sign on, but as with most things, it's even more difficult when you get to the implementation mode. And right now, we're heavy duty into the implementation mode, and I think across the country, we're learning what it's really going to take to make Common Core real. We're also raising the bar for students by expanding our world language opportunities, and I am particularly excited about this initiative. We are, over the next 5 years, opening up 20 immersion schools in our state. These will be schools within schools where students spend half their school day learning in a different language. We're starting within the next couple weeks with 340 kindergarten students across our state. Half of them doing Chinese, half of them doing Spanish, but not only will they be learning those languages in that language class, but they'll be learning science, social studies, and math in that target language. And frankly, I sold this in the state. There was a fair bit of pushback at first, and I sold this really not as an education issue, but as an economic development issue. Because if you think about the incredible linkages we now have in this country with companies based all over the world, we do our kids a disservice when we lead them to believe that they can be successful just with English. And so we're really excited about this particular opportunity. The goal is we'll reach more than 10,000 students over the next 10 years. By fourth grade, and these are kindergarten students who literally will be starting within the next couple weeks. By the time they're in fourth grade, they would be able to take their families to a country that speaks either Spanish or Chinese and navigate. By the ninth grade, they'll be able to pass well their AP class. And of course, this initiative capitalizes on a very well-known fact, which is that students' early years are critical for development and learning, which sort of leads me to talk about our early childhood investments. There is clear research that the most effective economic development investment a state can make is in early childhood education. And beyond the research, to the extent that any of you have ever met a 5-year-old kid who's already a year or two behind their peers, who already has a significant deficit in their vocabulary, it's a tragedy every single time. And so we are tackling this head on in our state, improving both access to and the quality of early childhood education programs. So in 2011, we did have some additional money come on the table, and I essentially had room for one new investment. And without it taking a lot of time, I decided to focus on early childhood education. Again, there's a lot of research, some of which is referenced in today's report, some of which comes out of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minnesota, again showing that the most effective economic development investment that a state can make is in early childhood education. So we invested some state resources. We were then fortunate enough to win the second of the Race to the Top, the Early Learning Challenge grants. And as a result, over the next 5 years, we are going to increase from 20 to 80, the percentage of poor kids in Delaware who are enrolled in in a quality preschool program. And my view is that that is a true game changer. We're really, really excited about that. And our effort's going to focus on 4 main pillars. One, it's aligning the birth to 8 approach to school readiness. Secondly, it's about strengthening the quality rating program. We've got a terrific program. This is not just about throwing money at a problem. We've got a terrific program in Delaware. It's called our STARS program, where early childhood centers know there are external milestones that they have to meet to get a certain STARS rating. We've got external reviewers, so it's a very, very clear, transparent process. So we're focusing on that as well. We're addressing the health and development of the whole child, and we're building a professional and effective early childhood workforce. And of course, for a lot of kids, this is one of the real challenges because so many of these centers don't have the resources that they need to invest in quality staff or in the materials. And our program is going to change that. We're also focusing on working with teaching professionals really taking that to the next level. We obviously know that our focus on building a professional workforce has to go beyond early childhood. which is why the third effort we're focused on is really transforming the education profession. As today's report clearly shows, the top-performing systems around the world are those that recruit and retain top-performing educators. In Delaware, we're focused on doing a number of things. Number one, conducting meaningful evaluations of educator performance and developing new leadership opportunities for our most effective educators. We're committed to creating more opportunities for our best educators to take on more responsibilities, to earn more compensation, while still staying in the classroom. And of course, around the country, this has been one of the big challenges. Teachers feel like they have to move on and get out of the classroom in order to earn more and in order to build their career. And we're focused on changing that. We're also adding some coaching initiatives for principals. And this is really important. When you talk to teachers, as I do all the time, and you ask them what they care the most about, they certainly care about compensation, but they also care about the kind of working environment within the school. Is it a collaborative environment? Do they have effective instructional leaders? And so much of our principals' time is taken up being administrative managers. And if you haven't been in a school recently and spent time with a principal, you'd probably be surprised by how much time they're focused on dealing with the bus company because the bus was late, dealing with the folks in food service because the parent complained that the food was cold, whatever it is. And we've got several initiatives underway to try to transition our principals to being more of instructional leaders. We've also got additional pathways to get into teaching positions, things like TFA, as well as what we call our STEM residency program as well. And finally, we're really focused on improving the level of professional development in our schools. I think a lot of teachers around the country feel that the money that we spend on professional development is often money that's not very well spent. And so we think we've got to ramp that up very significantly, which leads us to the last area I want to talk about, which has to do with the use of data. You know, it is absolutely stunning how little good data the educational community has had historically in terms of understanding how students are doing and giving good information on a timely basis to teachers and to principals and other staff so that they can change their approach. So we believe we're at the cutting edge of changing that in Delaware. And it's really about a new focus on transparency and performance and using data throughout the system to determine what's working and to challenge our thinking about what's not working. And now this is all possible because 2 years ago we introduced a new assessment in Delaware. Before that, we had one assessment a year. It was typically administered in the spring. The results came back in the summer. It was of absolutely no use to teachers who might want to say, okay, how am I doing? What can I change? How can I improve performance? That's all changed, and it's really changed within the last year because we have this new assessment. We just finished the second year of it, and it's offered several times a year. So teachers can see in real time what kind of progress their kids are making. And if you link that with and not only teachers see it, but of course principals and others. And the kind of conversations that this opens up, the kind of dialogue among educators is very, very powerful. So specifically, we have just about every public school teacher in Delaware now sits down several times a month with 5 of their peers. They sit at a table of 5 people, and they're drilling in to what the data is telling them about student performance. I've sat in on a number of these, including a session with elementary math teachers who were teaching kids to add fractions with different denominators. They were looking at the data, and the data was telling them that the kids are not making the kind of gains and getting the kind of performance that they had expected. So they reached out. The teachers took it upon themselves to reach out to a nearby school which was having better results to ask those teachers in that school, what kinds of worksheets are you using? What kind of approach are you using that we're not using here? It's very powerful. And similarly, we have our superintendents get together amongst themselves once a month, and periodically they get together and they sit down in groups of 4 or 5. They go to the front of the room with their own easel pad and they say, here's how we're doing on high school math, here's how we're doing in middle school reading. And the data is very clear. We're all looking at the same data. We're not making the kind of progress that we thought we were making in middle school reading. What can I learn from this other superintendent over here? And so this ties back to the professional development issue because many of the teachers in our state are telling us that this hands-on these hands-on meetings that they have several times a month is some of the best professional development that they have ever done. We also have periodic meetings between our Department of Education and our districts, where we essentially share the data with each other and ask questions about what they're doing to improve. And when the districts come, they come with the superintendent, with board members, with the local teacher union representative from that district, so that everybody is operating from the same set of facts. And again, these are very powerful conversations, and we think this orientation to being very data-oriented, very transparent, is just an incredibly useful tool. I had the opportunity just about a week ago to sit down with Delaware's Teacher of the Year from this year. She's a fifth-grade teacher in our Smyrna School District, and she was telling us just how powerful these opportunities are for her to sit down with her colleagues, to drill into the data, and to be able to talk with her peers about what they could be doing differently. So we're proud of the work that's underway in our state, everything from early childhood to better use of data to working with our teachers. But we also know that we've got a lot to do, and I think the report from today clearly says, even the states that are doing it best have a long way to go, and none of us can sit still, because it's very clear that all these countries around the world are doing quite the opposite of sitting still. They're investing massively into human capital. And so we know that identifying what comes off the plate at the state level is also very important, because we can't afford to do everything, which is why really trying to drill in and figure out what's working and what's not working is critically important, so we can do less of what's not working. And so to address that challenge, the leadership in our Department of Education is examining how we can better organize the department, trying to transition from it being a department that has historically been focused on compliance to being a department that is really focused on support. And it's my view that, and it's something that certainly I believe that Secretary Duncan has done nationally. I think he's been absolutely terrific with the support of states. I've also, and in that area of trying to figure out what's not working, I just signed a few weeks ago, an executive order requiring all of our state agencies to hold public hearings in all 3 of our counties, so that we can hear directly from the public, teachers, parents, and everybody else, what's not working with our regulations. To the extent that we're imposing regulations that don't have any benefit to kids, we better hear about it, because we can't afford to keep doing that. So, and finally, the last thing, and I think maybe this is easier to do in a state of Delaware's size, we have worked really, really hard to keep everybody at the table. That includes the business community. It includes the teachers union. It includes principals. It includes the disability community. It includes parents. It's really important. I mean, we don't have any luxury to have any finger pointing going on. And to the extent that we're getting something wrong, the best way to fix it is for us all to talk together to figure out together what we're getting wrong. So we've spent a lot of time on collaboration and keeping people at the table, and I think that's been valuable. So that's sort of my message. I wanted to give a sort of a local sense from the perspective of a governor. And I think a lot of great work is going on in many states across the country. I do have the privilege of working of serving as the chair of the National Governors Association. And I can tell you that this issue of competitiveness, it's not just me that thinks this is the issue of the day. You know, we spend a lot of time in our states trying to compete to get jobs and the like, but if companies have to decide first that they want to be in this country before they're deciding on one state versus another. So we have a lot of work to do together. I really appreciate the Center for the Next Generation working with the Center for American Progress on this report, highlighting this critical issue, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Governor, thanks very much, and we all appreciate your leadership on education. Next up, we're going to hear from Rick Hanishuk, who is Senior Fellow at Hoover Institute in our neck of the woods, Stanford University, right by my house. He is a renowned education economist, and as we have discussed, this is not just about money. He has made a critical contribution by focusing on what, with policymakers and political leaders, on how they can wisely use their resources for education. After that, we'll hear from Jonathan Voss of Lake Research, part of our bipartisan survey team, who has produced a survey for the Center for the Next Generation that looks at voters' attitudes on competitiveness and education. Rick?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to the 2 organizations that sponsored this great report. When I look at this report, I think that it is starting to move the discussion in exactly the right way. The talk is not about tomorrow. It's about decades from now. It's about our children. It's not about what's going on today. It's what we're going to look like in the future. I wanted to run through a few things. I should say also, as the governor leaves, Delaware is one of the top 3 states in terms of improvement on measured performance in math and science over the last 2 decades. So you should put a little extra weight on his comments. Let me see if I can. What I want to start with is a very simple little syllogism, and that is that the future of the United States in the long run depends upon its economic growth. If we remain the same, we're pleasantly doing all right, but everybody else is going to move past us, and that's one of the arguments about this report. The second thing is a statement that gets a lot of lip service, but I think it needs more than lip service, and that is the only thing, in my opinion, that matters for long-run growth is the human capital of the workforce in the United States. That's what's led to our success in the past. That is what will propel us in the future. This report has made a great contribution in pointing out that it's the broad investment in our youth that is going to make the difference in the country. It is not whether we regulate this in the marketplace or whether the tax rate moves by 1 or 2% or that. What's going to matter is whether we in fact invest in our youth and they get the results. And then finally, I'll put in a remark that runs through this report that is not going to be so central to my talk, but it is absolutely clear that we've had a lot of discussion about distributional issues in recent times, and the only way that we're going to solve our distributional problems is by thinking about good investments in our youth and what that means. So let me fill in a few details. This report is important because it makes the statement that other nations recognize what has made the United States strong, which is our investment in human capital. And in particular, what's highlighted in this report is China and India, which are not very good economies right now, but in 20 years may look entirely different. And that's the message here. Now, so what we want to think about here is not how they are investing. There's a lot of that in the report, but it's what they're doing. And in particular, it's that they're models of commitment to the future that we don't quite see in the same regard in the United States. And I think they point out it's the challenge to the United States' future. It's not that our nation is going to fall apart or we're going to go into a long recession or anything if we don't invest today. It's that we will not keep pace. We will not have the standard of living at the forefront that we're used to. We will not be doing the kinds of jobs that we're used to in terms of technological leadership and so forth. And that's the key. So let me try to simply underscore what investments in human capital mean. What I'm going to try to do is talk about the value of increasing the skills of our workforce. We have measures of the math and science ability of our students, PISA and TIMSS that we see regularly, that the governor mentioned and so forth. What is less recognized is that performance on these tests is an extraordinarily powerful predictor of what economic growth looks like in the future. I mean, extraordinarily powerful. This is the thing that matters. And what is missed is the magnitude of this economic effect, that if you just sit back and say, oh yeah, we know education is important, let's do some more of this, you're missing the point. And so let me try to put this in a simple table that comes from some work that I've done with a colleague in Germany on economic growth and the impacts in the future. In particular, I'm going to say, what would the US future look like if we could be at the level of Germany, Canada, or Finland, which is up above us? Or what would it be if we actually made No Child Left Behind work? I'll give you all four of those for a second. What I'm going to do is say, if the future looks like the past 50 years, then we know that improving performance up to the levels of these other countries will change our growth rate, which will change the future GDP of the US. And we can calculate in dollar terms, in current dollar terms, what would be the impact of these. Here's a table you won't believe. I hope you can see this. The first row of this is calculating the present value of the added gains to our GDP over the next 80 years, which is the lifetime of somebody born today. The expected lifetime of somebody born today. Look at the expected GDP. The columns are Germany, Canada, Finland, and then I'll get to NCLB in a second. These are levels of performance that are increasingly farther from us. The first number, I don't know that I have I have the wrong thing. The first number on that chart in the upper left-hand corner says, getting up to the level of Germany has a present value of $43.8 trillion. That's on a 15 or 16 trillion dollar GDP that we have today. We're talking about 3 times the current GDP is the present value of getting up to Germany. Now, think of Canada. When I was going to graduate school, we used to refer to it as the 13th Federal Reserve District. It's kind of like the US, right? A little colder, but it's kind of like the US. If we could get our performance levels, which is an index of the quality of our labor force, up to the level of Canada, it's $82 trillion. And then Finland, the eye of everybody in the world, but it's too cold. But except for being too cold, if we could get to that level, it's $112 trillion in present value compared to our 15 or 16 trillion dollar GDP today. Now, if we could actually make NCLB work, which is operationally get everybody up to basic levels on these international math and science tests, that's worth $86 trillion. It's not a trivial matter. Now, the second row of this says, well, what proportion of this is of all the future GDP? Because GDP gets big and so forth, so numbers like trillions of dollars don't mean anything to you. Germany is like getting an increase in GDP of 6% every year for the next 80 years. Canada is 11.4%. Finland is 15.8%. NCLB is 12%. So let me translate that into another thing that might make sense to you. About half of our population works, draws salaries. So what these numbers say is just double these percentages, and it says this is the average increase in the paycheck of every worker in the United States for the next 80 years. So just getting up to Germany, which isn't too far ahead of us, but they're working hard at pulling away from us, is like a 12% across the board increase in salaries for every worker in the United States for the next 80 years. And you get up to Canada is a 20% pay increase, nothing else. In my sort of reckoning from California, that looks like it's worth it, worth doing something. What we know is that other countries are doing it. First, the report underscores how Canada and India are mimicking the US investments in human capital that have made us strong in the past. Secondly, there's this other aspect that, you know, Canada and India had the world's most messed up economies for a very long period of time. And all of a sudden they see, well, we'll make our institutions, our economic institutions work too, which will make these investments in human capital even more productive. And they're doing that quite dramatically. And what we're seeing is all these other countries that now surpass the US in terms of the school attainment, the years of schooling, and are doing it with higher quality. So very few people, at least outside of this room, this is the room that understands it, but very few people understand that today the US has a lower completion rate of high school than the average OECD country, the average developed country. If you go out on the street, I think if we walk down to H Street and ask somebody, they would say, oh, we're probably first in the world in terms of the amount of education. And it's not true, neither in quantity or quality. This report is really important, in my opinion, because it says that we have to think of a broad investment in our youth. We have to worry about the families and making sure that they're helping out because they're extraordinarily important in education. We have to worry about the support networks, the early childhood development, and the schools. In the past, we've done two things. First, everybody in the United States, including the people down on H Street, say, oh yeah, we got to do more about our schools. But it's more lip service. And if anything, it calls for sort of deepening what we're doing now. So we'll have slightly smaller class sizes, we'll have this, that, or the other thing, a little extra program for reading on Thursdays and so forth, without thinking about what it is that actually creates higher achievement and better performance. Now, I myself, and probably go farther than the report in terms of saying that the essential component, at least of the schooling part, is the quality of teachers. But that's not doing more. And it's making better choices. It's getting better people in. It's keeping good people. It's getting rid of bad people. And every time I say getting rid of bad people, everybody sort of tenses up. But it's a combination of making better choices to ensure that the quality of our teachers is higher. I would say it's a need to do something different rather than more. We've tried the more strategy very dramatically and consistently over the last 40 years, and more has left us flat in terms of performance and outcomes. We have to do something different. And then this was the line that was for the governor. You know, we just need political leadership here, and we need governors to stop saying we've got to do more and get governors to say we've got to do better. And that's where we are, in my opinion.
Thank you, Eric. My name is Jonathan Voss. I'm with Lake Research Partners, and I want to thank Ann and Matt at the Center for Next Generation and Nir at the Center for American Progress for their commitment to these issues. I, as the child of two teachers, it's fun to work with folks who are committed to the next generation. We wanted to conduct a survey with voters to see how they perceive America's standing in the world on education relative to kind of in combination with this report. And the one thing I would differ with what Eric had just said is if you went to that person on H Street, they would want America to be the leader in the world on education, but they're not necessarily sure that we are at the moment. And we asked a question, first of all, just the methodology of the poll. We asked over 1,200 registered voters, likely 2012 general election voters. We had over samples of African American and Latinos. This survey was conducted at the end of July. And one of the questions, though, that we asked was a follow-up to a question that had been asked in 2011. And once again, we found that a plurality of Americans do, in fact, think that the United States is falling behind other countries when it comes to education. We asked the question in another way as well, and voters believe that, plurality of voters believe that other countries are surpassing the United States when it comes to education. And then we asked it in a couple playful ways, which I will show you as well, where you see that a majority of Americans think that future innovators are going to come from other countries. Voters want our leaders to prioritize restoring America's leadership, and they want to increase investment in education, particularly executives. The next president are their state's governor, a little bit more so than their leaders in Congress. And very interestingly for us, they are very willing to pay more in taxes if those funds are dedicated towards education, especially K through 12 education. Majorities would pay more in taxes for pre-K, K through 12, and higher education, and majorities would also pay more in taxes personally and reduce spending in other areas if those funds were dedicated across education levels. But for K to 12, we found majorities across party lines actually are willing to pay more in taxes. So on the left side, you'll see on this graph, we re-asked this question from 2011, and in 2011, 48% of voters felt the United States is behind other countries, 22% about even, and 20% ahead. And today you'll see 46% say we were behind, 25% ahead, and 21% about even. On the right-hand side, we asked it in a different way. Are schools in China and India catching up with, surpassing, about the same, or falling behind U.S. schools? 14% say they're catching up. A 44% plurality say that they are surpassing schools in the United States. 13% about the same, and 10% falling behind. So no matter, two different approaches of this question, very similar result. And these numbers are very consistent across party lines. Asked in a different way, on the left-hand side, we asked, where will the next Bill Gates come from? And on the right-hand side, where will the scientist who cures cancer come from? And you can see that, yes, more people say the United States than any one country, 35% saying the United States will produce the next Bill Gates. And we explained who that was, the founder of Microsoft. And 31% believe that the United States will produce the scientist who cures cancer. But you can see the majority on the left-hand side, 52% of voters, said that the next innovative leader like a Bill Gates will come from another country. 25% from China, 15% from India, 3% from Europe, or 9% from somewhere else. And on the right-hand side, where will the scientist who cures cancer come from? 47% say another country. In terms of the priority that voters place on this issue, it's a high one. 78% of voters want the next president, whether it's Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, to make restoring America's leadership in education and increasing investments in education a top priority. 42% a top priority, 36% a high but not necessarily the top priority. And these are consistent across party lines as well. Among Democrats, for the president, they would like 90% to be a top or high priority for education. Among independents, it's 83%. Among Republican voters, it's 61%. At the governor's level, 85% of Democrats say top or high priority, 78% of independent voters, and 69% of Republicans. And in terms of the next Congress, 77% of Democrats, 70% of independents, and 67% of Republicans. So at least 2/3 of voters across party lines want restoring America's leadership in education to be a top or a high priority. And not only do they want it to be a priority for their leaders, they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. We asked this question in two different ways. Willingness to pay more in taxes if the funds were dedicated to education programs for pre-K, for K through 12, and for higher education. And then we also asked one half of the sample if they would be willing to pay more in taxes and reduce spending in other programs. And majorities across these three different education levels said that they would be willing to. So the dark blue bar means that they are very willing to pay more in taxes. The light blue bar is somewhat willing. So those total numbers, you can see through K through 12 there, 68% of voters are willing to pay more in taxes if those funds are dedicated to education. And by party, that's 81% of Democrats, 59% of independents, and 57% of Republicans. At the higher education and the pre-K levels, it's a little bit more consolidated around Democrats who are willing to pay more in taxes. There are lower levels of independents and Republicans, but on K through 12, across party lines, there is a desire there to personally pay more in taxes if those funds are dedicated to education. Similarly, if paying more taxes and reducing spending for other domestic programs, you can see that majorities of voters would do so for all three education levels. Again, the partisan dynamic is very similar. By party, the consensus is around K through 12. 76% of Democrats, 64% of independents, and 55% of Republicans say they are very or somewhat willing to pay more in taxes and reduce spending in other areas if those funds are dedicated in education programs. So that's a little bit of the taste of where voters are coming out on these issues. I'm going to turn this back to Ann O'Leary.
Thank you very much. I'm Ann O'Leary. I'm the director of the Children and Families Program at the Center for the Next Generation, and I want to just say that I'm delighted to be back in D.C., my home base of the Center for American Progress, wearing my new hat. As Matt said, the Center for the Next Generation is a new think tank based in San Francisco, dedicated to improving investments in children and families and investing wisely in children and families, and really gaining the political will. We're very focused on looking at how we can use strategic communications to get people focusing and thinking about these issues, but backed by high quality research, and that's what we're doing here today. I'm delighted to be joined on the stage by Rick Hanushek, who you just met from Stanford University, Hoover Institute, Bob Carpenter, who was one of the co-authors of the survey that Jonathan Voss just presented. He's with Chesapeake Beach Consulting and a long-time, very well-respected survey researcher and pollster, particularly in Republican surveys. We're pleased to have him and Celinda Lake having done this bipartisan survey with us. And then Marilyn Resnick, who is with AT&T and is the Executive Director of Educational Leadership at AT&T, a long work in education leadership from the business side, and really delighted that Marilyn is here with us. Before starting the discussion, I just also want to reiterate my thanks to the Center for American Progress, and particularly to Donna Cooper, who worked very hard on this, and to Adam Hirsch, both co-authors on the report. Really terrific work, dug very hard into the data from China and India, and we really appreciate that. And also thanks to Neera Tandon and Michael Ettlinger, who provided a lot of guidance and leadership throughout, so I really appreciate their help. Let me start with Marilyn, who we haven't heard from yet. I want to go back to the report and say a little bit more about one of the things that we're finding, and particularly draw on what we're seeing in the business community. So Matt started by telling you one fact that I want to reiterate. In China, by 2030, we're going to have 200 million college graduates coming out of China. That's more than the entire United States labor force. We've got about 155 million people in our labor force. The other fact that we highlighted in the report that is really quite interesting is that if we look at the U.S. labor force, one of the things that's happening is that as people are retiring and we're getting new individuals into the labor force, we're seeing that we have a less educated labor force today. So our new entrants into the labor force are less educated than those who are retiring from the U.S. labor force. So really a change in how we're doing things in the United States. Marilyn was mentioning to us at the beginning of this conversation the commitment that AT&T has made to the type of people they feel they need to hire into their workforce, which is that they only hire people who have some type of post-secondary education or training in terms of new entrants into AT&T. So they're doing this at a time in which there's a scarcity in terms of individuals who are going to qualify for those jobs. So Marilyn, I'd like to just turn to you and have you say a little bit about what type of commitment you think the business community is making and needs to make in the future as we look at what our global competitors are doing.
Thank you. AT&T, like every company, invests in education because we need a smart, skilled workforce to be successful in an increasingly, competitive global marketplace. We know that education is directly tied to economic growth and development. In fact, investing in education may be the most important thing we can do to help America remain a leader in a global economy. We invest a lot in education to increase high school graduation rates and better prepare students for college and career. A lot of companies are investing in education, and yet, in spite of those investments, in spite of all the good efforts that are going on in this country to improve education and workforce development, we still are not able to find enough workers with the skills we need to fill the jobs that are available today. And then if you look at the graduation rates in this country in both high school and post-secondary education, those numbers are only going to get worse. Then when you look at what China and India are doing, that's real cause for concern, and that's why we need to do more.
Great, well, thank you. And what, can you say a little bit more about the type of investments you're seeing the other kind of corporate community investing in? I know for many years we have had the Business Roundtable and others stepping up to the plate. We have the governor of Delaware today saying that they want to make sure that business is at the table. What are you seeing in terms of how do we get businesses like AT&T more involved in this debate in a public way?
I think we do have to do that, and we have to engage a broader part of the business community. It can't just be a handful of companies that are always the leaders. It can't just be the Business Roundtable. It needs to be all businesses, and we need to work hard to engage more of them. We've chosen to focus on a particular problem in the country, but other companies are looking at K-12 education, early childhood education, and in fact, I think there's a real growing sense of urgency in the business community, particularly around K-12 education. But I think we have to be careful that it's not just K-12 education, because by the time we get those students out of high school, we need to make sure that post-secondary institutions are prepared to accept those students, graduate more of them faster, and have them prepared to enter the workforce.
Well, great. Let me pick up on something you said and turn to Bob. So one of the things that we found in this poll is that there is this very strong commitment to K through 12 education. Jonathan just presented 68% of voters said that they'd be willing to increase their taxes in order to commit more to K through 12 education. 57% of Republicans said that they would increase their taxes if it was dedicated to K through 12 education, but not the same robust numbers when we looked at early childhood and we look at higher ed. Bob, can you say a little bit more about what it's going to take in terms of the political will on some of these issues? I think one of the things that we saw in this report is that in some sense we know what to do, but what we need is in some sense the robust numbers we're seeing in K through 12. So maybe you could speak a little bit to what we saw in the K through 12 numbers and your analysis of those numbers.
Certainly. Just to follow up on one thing that Marilyn said, the public is ready to follow the business community in terms of the investment in education. We clearly saw those in the numbers that my colleague Jonathan just presented in terms of the willingness to pay more in taxes across the board, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or independent. And we see slightly higher numbers among parents on those same questions in terms of a willingness, which is really not surprising. In terms of how we move forward from here, the public, again, as Jonathan pointed out, the public believes that a high priority or a top priority of both their governor as well as the next president and the next Congress should be focused on that, on education. And when you think about the high versus top and all the things that a governor or a member of Congress or a president has on his or her plate, to make it a high priority and not a top priority is still a very important statement. And when you're in the 80s and 90% of the public wanting a focus on education, that speaks volumes for what our elected officials should be doing. In terms of moving forward, it's really convincing our elected officials that this is a priority, not just of those of us in the room or those of us at think tanks around the city or around the country, but it's the public that's ready. Voting members of the public, those that are likely to vote in the 2012 presidential election, want a focus on education, and they're willing to pay for it. And that's really the message that needs to be delivered to both sides of the aisle. And on my particular side of the aisle, we're seeing, 60% plus saying, sure, I'll pay more in taxes for a commitment to education.
Yeah, it's a fascinating number, and I think, I want to highlight two things you just said. One is that I really want to highlight to the audience that this survey were of voters who are likely to vote in the next election, and that's really important. But the other thing that you said is that that parents pull higher on some of these numbers. Not surprising. But I think one of the things that's so fascinating is in the last several weeks, we've seen this very big shift in the presidential debate where we have a lot more people focused on and talking about Medicare and talking about what we need to be doing for our seniors. And that's obviously a very critical part of who we are as a society, that we want to make sure that our seniors, our greatest generation, do not live in poverty. And we're committed to that through Medicare and through Social Security. But one of the things I think is frustrating is how do we have that respect for that debate, but also ensure that we have the type of commitment to the next generation, to our young people. And one of the things that I think that I'd love for you to say a little bit more about, Bob, is what we're seeing in terms of parents' commitment and how we might be able to build on that to get our politicians to understand that parents are voting on these issues. And in fact, they do care about this. They of course, also care about Medicare, but this is a top priority, is a high priority, and they should be talking about it.
Certainly. Let me share some additional numbers. In terms of the question on where we rank, as you'll remember, Jonathan pointed out that among all respondents, the U.S. is ahead. 25% said ahead, 46% said behind, and 21% said about even. Among parents, 21 ahead, 55, a difference of 9 points behind, and 16 about even. So across the board, we're seeing parents believing that the U.S., in comparison to other countries, is falling behind. A majority believe that. To the question, do you think schools in China and India are catching up with U.S. schools, surpassing U.S. schools, about the same as U.S. schools, or falling behind? We see about the same numbers, 14% among all respondents catching up, 14% among parents, 44% surpassing among all, 46% among parents, and 13 about the same among both. But when you look at making the commitment, how willing would you be to pay more in taxes if the funds raised were dedicated to kindergarten through 12th grade education programs? Among all respondents, 66% very or somewhat willing. Among parents, 75% very, somewhat, or willing. So a difference of 7 points. How willing would you be to pay more taxes as well as reduce spending? Among all respondents, 65% very or willing. Among parents, 71 very or willing. So you see a greater commitment among parents. One of the tasks for those of us that do politics for a living is encouraging and convincing parents to get out and vote and strongly deliver the message that they're going to hold their elected officials accountable. When you look at the questions relating to the priority for the next president, among all respondents, 78% said that it was a top or high priority. Among parents, 88%. When 88% of a particular voting bloc is saying something, it's incumbent on any elected official or someone that wants to be an elected official to certainly listen. The next Congress, among all respondents, 72% a top or high priority. Among parents, 75%. So not much of a difference, but when 75% or even 72% of the public is expressing a particular point of view, it's important to obviously pay attention. Your state's governor, among all respondents, 77% a top or high priority. Among parents, 85. So again, a difference of 8 points. 85% of parents are saying to their governor, pay attention. Focus, make it either a top priority or a high priority. And again, when you think of all that's on a governor's plate or all that's on a president's plate, to have 85% focusing on a single issue as a top or high priority, that's a pretty strong message that if I were a governor, I would be rewriting my State of the State
Right.
speech right now.
Right. Well, so we've heard from Marilyn about the business leadership available and interested in doing this. We see that there's political will to do this. And then the question is, what do we do? And Rick touched upon that in his remarks, that I'd like to have him say a little bit more. I want to highlight one other piece of this report, and I also noticed that somebody in the audience who helped with this report is Ari Amerikaner, who was our research associate, and really dug into some of the PISA numbers. And one of the things that she brought forth, and we have in this report, is this issue that if you look at reading scores, one of the things that's happening in the United States is that we're doing quite mediocre with regard to our international comparison. But students who go to our most wealthy schools, so the way we measure that is we look at free and reduced price lunch. So if less than 10% of the students have free and reduced price lunch, we call that a wealthier school. Our poorest schools is where 90% of the kids are on free and reduced price lunch. You see a huge gap. So you see our wealthiest students actually are number one in reading compared to these other countries, where our poorest students would be second to last, only second to Mexico. So really a huge difference. Not so much of a difference on math, as Matt pointed out at the beginning. We're all doing mediocre in terms of our math. But Rick, you have really focused on looking at what it would mean if we actually made some improvements, both in our math assessments, but also if we close some of these inequities that we have overall. Can you say a little bit more about that in terms of, if we did have the political will and the business will, what would we be able to see and do?
Well, I mean, what we're really talking about is changing U.S. society. You introduced the discussion of Medicare, and with the current debates, the Paul Ryan budget is all about what's the balance between future revenues and future expenditures of the federal government trying to take care of the fiscal problems we see. They all go away with a slightly higher growth rate, frankly. I mean, they go away, and we don't have those discussions if, in fact, we can improve the quality of our schools. Now, the problem with improving the quality, I think we've had from Washington, D.C., and the unfortunate part about this meeting is it's in Washington, D.C., and it gives you the sense that Washington, D.C. has much to do with education in the U.S., where, in fact, it's the 50 states that are the key to education. I think we've had two terrific presidents in terms of education policy in a row, I think. George Bush and Barack Obama have been terrific on education issues, but it's whether you can get the states to, in fact, change dramatically. If you go out into the countryside, outside of this district that we're in, you see that there's a real battle going on about how do we adjust things. We all witnessed Wisconsin and saw that Wisconsin was in a lot of turmoil about how state laws should affect schools. There's a dozen other states that have gone under the radar that have dramatically changed their labor laws or their pension systems or what have you, trying to deal with education. None of the states quite know what to do. We don't have a lot of experience in this, and this is all a great experiment. I happen to think it's a good experiment because it is moving states to consider first and foremost issues of the pay of teachers and the evaluation of teachers and how those go together, which is, to me, the secret to changing anything.
Right. Well, one of the other secrets to changing anything is also investing early and thinking about early childhood. And so I want to also raise that because one of the things I think is very fascinating, both from listening to Marilyn and also Bob and the work that he did on this survey, is that we see in the business community and in the voting public this really strong commitment to K through 12, but not a strong commitment to early learning, not a strong commitment necessarily to higher education. And I think it's important to recognize what China and India are doing in this way and what we are doing. So China and India, as Matt noted at the beginning, China has said that we are going to make sure that 70% of our population gets 3 years of preschool education. They're 3-year-olds, they're 4-year-olds, and they count preschool as what we would count as kindergarten, so they're 5-year-olds. They'll get 3 years of that. For us, our 3 and 4-year-olds, only about 50% of them get any preschool education. So really quite a different, significant difference. India has also recognized this commitment and said that we're going to make sure that 60% of our kids are ready to learn when they enter primary school by 2018. So again, a very different commitment. What's happening in the United States, as many people know, is that we have made a commitment at our states. Many states have made a commitment to preschool education. But as we've seen the Great Recession and the impact it has had on our economy, those have had to roll back, or they've perceived that they've had to roll back. They, in fact, have rolled back. And we are, I think this is concerning. So I'd like, Rick, for you just to say a word about the economic impact of this, and then if Marilyn, Bob, you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that having a good start through preschool education is extraordinarily important. I mean, what we do see is that the kids that are behind in the 6th grade are the ones that were behind in kindergarten, and that we have to deal with this issue from not only a sort of equity, fairness kind of perspective, but also from where our country is going to go, because these are resources that are being left behind. Much of this discussion of preschool actually can be traced back to a colleague of mine, Jim Heckman, Nobel laureate in economics from Chicago, who has done a lot of work on preschool. And the simple line that he has that I think should run through all of this discussion is that learning begets learning. When you start better off, you learn more in 3rd grade if you start ahead. When you know more in 9th grade, you do better in college, and the colleges and universities can build upon these stronger base. And that it starts early, and we have to do something that our nation has not done to the extent that all the other European nations have done, and that is to try to ensure a solid starting point. And now part of this, and the statistics that we had before, were that upper income, middle class and upper income parents know this story, that you start early. And I remember a psychologist friend of mine that I won't quote on this, said, well, when we have Head Start, it's really about nutrition and health and nutrition because it's not developmentally appropriate for kids to learn things. And then you look at every middle-class parent in the country who is making sure that their child is learning way before they get into any kind of school, and you realize that this is not the right thing, that you really have to start early, and in particular, our most vulnerable populations have to be helped.
I think this report is really sobering. I think we've all got some notion that, China and India, yeah, they're really big, but when you see the numbers, it's really startling. And then when you realize where they're putting their investment, starting early, we're not. It doesn't take a lot of math to figure out where we're going to end up. And I just think the report is very important for putting real numbers, real data behind that, rather than, yeah, we sort of need to worry about them because, yeah, they're sort of big and, they're growing. This is real data, real numbers, and that is really alarming.
I want to make the point that the public, while perhaps not quite as committed to spending money or being taxed for K through 12 education, is still supportive of being taxed for pre-K and for higher education. When you see a number like 68%, which was the number that are willing to pay more in taxes for K through 12 education, you think, wow, 68%, 2/3 of the American public or the voting public are willing to be taxed to pay more for education or to have the commitment made to education. It's important to point out that 56% of those same voters said that they would pay more for pre-K education, and 55% said that they would pay more for higher ed. And I don't know of a single politician in this country who wouldn't take 55% job approval or reelect score or 55% of the ballot or 56% and not be happy. So while 68 is a great number and it's a number that we focused on, the 55 and the 56 for higher ed and pre-K respectively are important numbers to remember and to think about, because the public is committed to spending more of their tax dollars on education across the board. K through 12 certainly comes in first, but the other two are not far behind.
Great. I'm going to open it up to questions in just one moment, so get your questions ready. Rick had one more point he wanted to make.
I just wanted to add a couple quick anecdotes. I'm not really a West Coast person by birth, but I moved out to Silicon Valley sometime in the past, and two stories that come up there. First is the importance of imported labor into Silicon Valley, which is a reflection of the fact that many of the firms in Silicon Valley look more to H-1B visas than they do to our K-12 education system, and that is key. The second is that to try to keep my body going, I like to play squash, and I play with some of the people around Stanford. One of my long-term squash opponents was somebody who was getting a PhD in electrical engineering at Stanford University. And we're in the middle of Silicon Valley, and one day he comes onto the squash courts and says, "I'm going back to India. The opportunities are better there for me than they are in Silicon Valley." And that's the part that rings home when we talk about China and India, and not only developing their own, but having the opportunities for educated people.
Right, and using our world-class education system to then import it back to their countries, which I think is another good point. Okay, we have several questions in the pink right there, in the back, second.
Is it on? Okay, thank you. My name is Irina Gelevska. I'm a correspondent for Macedonian television from Macedonia, Europe. You're talking about, this is a question for all of you. You're talking about competition coming from China and India in 10, 20 years from now. What about now? If in September Greece leaves the Eurozone and other European countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Ireland follow, are you ready for the flow of high-skilled personnel coming to USA? When I talk about high-skilled personnel, I'm not talking about college graduates only. I'm talking about doctor science. Okay, people who speak at least 2 foreign languages.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that is really evident is that we in this particular report, we've been focusing on the competitors, India and China, in the future. There are, real competition in terms of what's going on right now, and you bring up the issue of Europe. And I think one of the things that we're recognizing is that no matter where we look at right now, the United States isn't preparing our children for today or tomorrow, certainly not for tomorrow. And I think even today we're stretched in terms of how we've prepared our young people. I was actually looking at some data that's not in the report, but looking at some data about foreign languages, which is one of the issues you just mentioned. I took the red eye last night because my daughter started kindergarten yesterday. I need to be there for her first day of kindergarten. She started at a Mandarin immersion school in Oakland, California, a charter school called Yuming Charter School. And so I was curious about how many children in the United States are learning Mandarin. And it turns out that the last time they collected the data, which is about 4 years ago, only 60,000 kids in the entire United States were in some type of Mandarin immersion program. The entire country of China is teaching their children English. Only about 1 in 5 children in the United States learn another language. Most of them are learning Spanish. So we really are, behind in terms of a whole plethora of issues, including foreign languages. But I think you make a good point, which is that we need to look at both today and tomorrow. Anybody want to add to that?
We're going to take advantage of as many Europeans highly trained as we can. And actually, I think that this is one of from a very parochial U.S. view, this is one of the ways that we can bridge to a better educated labor force by, in the short run, borrowing people that are trained in better education systems abroad.
Let's see, we have in the purple and then in the blue.
Hi, thank you. Alyssa Schwenk from Change the Equation. One of the tenets mentioned at the beginning of the presentation in terms of where countries like China and India are investing their resources and their strategies regarding education was STEM. And we spoke a lot about early childhood, and we also spoke a little bit less about teacher quality, but I'm just wondering what investments are China and India making that are really interesting in terms of their science and technology education?
Yeah, so I'll say something about this, and I'll turn to Rick, who's been focused a lot on the impact of math assessments. But so first of all, congratulations to Change the Equation. You're a great new organization that's really focusing on math and on the STEM subjects. So what we know, and Matt mentioned at the beginning, is that China and India right now, China in particular right now, is graduating over 1 million people in the STEM subjects. We have just under 500,000 people. They're investing tremendously in making sure that their population, their in higher education, are training in those subjects. India is making the same type of investment. We are making investments much smaller scale. One of the problems we're facing in the United States is that when we get to, and I know you know this more than anybody, but one of the problems we have is that because we don't start early, by the time our students get to college, they're not able to participate in those STEM subjects because they haven't received the baseline that they need in their early ed and then K through 12 education. Marilyn, did you want to make a point on that?
Yeah, we too are very concerned about that and proud to be a member of Change the Equation. Not surprising that an AT&T would care about STEM. Those disciplines are at the heart of our business. But increasingly, we think those disciplines are going to be important to every industry and every business. STEM drives innovation. Innovation drives the economy. And I think that's why it's so important.
Right.
Well, just as a sort of a simple global answer, many other nations pay attention to whether their teachers know math before they teach it. And we don't pay as much attention to that in the U.S., so that the STEM problems that are often talked about are middle school math and so forth. I think they're actually 3rd and 4th grade math, where we aren't preparing them, and maybe it goes even deeper than that. And that we have to make a commitment that knowledge and results are important.
Let's see, the blue here and then orange in the back. So I'm calling you out by your colors today. If you stand up, I'll repeat your question.
Thank you for your preview of coming attractions over the next 30 years. I have 2 observations to offer. My name is Morad Iqbal, and I was formerly at the Center for International Comparative Law at the University of Baltimore, now with Plasmera Technologies, LLC. And the 2 observations I want to offer, and would like to have the reaction of the panelists, all 4 if possible, is number 1, when we talk about quality in the present context, the danger I perceive is that we may have already yielded the ground to those who are competing with us in that area, i.e. we want to model quality within 30 years on what China and India and other countries and Finland and Canada and Germany are doing. The question I have that arises out of this observation is, what processes do you see in place for us globally to define quality? Not unlike, today's news tells us Apple is now the largest capitalized company, and somehow the company has defined quality globally. They've managed to do that. And it's an American company, last I still looked. So I would like to hear some observations about how do we go about really thinking about the 30 years ahead from now, not in an American context, but in a global context. The second observation and question I have is, I see implicit in what has been said, and I haven't had the benefit of reading the entire report, I admit that we will lose part of the population, regardless of what we do. So I would like for the panelists to talk about what assumptions have gone into this study. You've talked about the results, you've talked about the methodology, you've talked about the procedure, but what assumptions have gone into it when you started out on this process to define the study? Thank you very much for taking it.
Great. So let me turn to the panel to think a little bit about quality. I know a number of people are working on an effort in the states to define some of our national goals of how we are preparing children in terms of being ready for post-secondary training or for college or post-secondary education through something called the Common Core Initiative to make sure that we do have an understanding across all of our states. Marilyn, I don't know if AT&T has been that involved, but do you want to speak a little bit to some of that effort?
Yes, we are very involved and very committed to helping the states now implement the Common Core standards in both math and English language arts. As Governor Markell said earlier, the real hard part comes now in implementation. We have states agreeing to that, but now implementing that and then dealing with the results of the assessments when those come in 2014. But for us, we're going to be the recipients of the outcomes of that, if you will. That's going to form our workforce. We must adhere to higher standards, to higher quality, so that we can remain a competitive force.
I think that to your first question, quality is going to be very hard to measure because in for instance, the business community, the quality of the employee, how they perform his or her job is the measurement. To a parent, the quality of education is going to be so their child has it a little better, if not a lot better than they had. So they're different measurements in terms of quality. And you know, when you think of quality, you often finish the phrase quality of life. And because China is going to have 200 million college graduates, more than our entire workforce, I think that the American public or the average American would think, wow, that's a shocking figure. But what about the quality of their life compared to the quality of my life or the quality of my child's life? And how do while that 200 million is an astounding figure, how is that going to affect me? And more importantly, how's that going to affect my child or my grandchild? And so I want to do what I can, either through paying more taxes or encouraging my governor or my Congress member to be more out front and involved in pushing the education agenda at all levels. Ultimately, that's going to be my measurement in terms of quality, because my child or my grandchild is better off, is a little better educated, has a better life than I do. And so the 200 million is an astounding figure, but you have to put it in a sense of the entire person's existence and how that's going to be measured and affected.
Anything to add, Rick?
So I have a slightly different take on this, and that is that for the first order kinds of policy decisions that we're making, we have a measure of quality. We can measure the skills and thinking ability of people fairly well with assessments that we have around, and that's fine. There's a much broader sense that everybody thinks about quality of life, and you know, for me, it's not necessary that every person in this room knows advanced econometrics, but you know, in a small area, that's important. And there's going to be nuances and so forth, but for the kinds of broad policy decisions and the broad competition in terms of the development of the world economy in the future, I think we do okay right now. We know how to do it.
And let me just say one thing about the assumptions that were made as we took on the report. So one thing I want to make sure to be really clear is that obviously global competition is not all bad, and having China and India have educated workforces is in fact a good thing, which is that we want more people in the world to be educated, to be contributing to solving the world's problems, if the cure for cancer comes from China and the United States, we all will benefit from that. And so this is a good thing that they are improving the education of their workforce. But one of the things we don't want to see happen is for the United States to be in a lackluster economy with a poorly educated citizenry. And so that's where we started. And we looked at really what's happening, and I just was pulling out some of the numbers here in terms of the world economic output. And what you're seeing is that From 1980 to 2011, China actually increased their world economic output from 2% to 14% of the world's economic output. Over the same period of time, the United States decreased its world economic output from a quarter, 25%, down to 19%. So we're going in different directions, and that's the assumption that we started with and said, okay, well, how do we begin to reverse that trend so that we can be competing on an even keel with our competitors, and we can continue to be going up, and that's where we really started. I had called on the women back here. That will be our last question, and then I want to have Donna Cooper make some closing remarks.
Is this working? Yes, it is. I'm Mindy Reiser. I'm a sociologist. I've worked with the U.S. Department of Education and also internationally. And then, of course, really varies. Some private educational institutions are really diploma mills. We have this in this country, but they have them there too. Another U.S. campuses overseas, there's King Abdullah University, which is luring with great salaries, people in high tech from all over the world, and we have campuses in the Gulf states and elsewhere. Curricula that are available internationally. MIT has done a lot of that. So some of the opportunities to learn and grow are now diffusing internationally, even though you can't get a degree. My question is to Marilyn. I would like to ask you a little bit more specifically about the world of business universities. What I'm talking about, there's Motorola University, there's Gallup University. How are you perceiving this? Does AT&T have a university? Of course, Cisco does a lot. Is there an association bringing them together? Can you tell us more specifically exactly what kind of training AT&T does provide in terms of its workforce and career ladders and so on? I'd like you to comment on my observations in terms of what that means. Growth of educated population.
I'm just going to repeat slightly her question because the microphone wasn't working very well. So I think there were a couple of questions in there. One is that the quality of higher ed in some of these countries are not as good as they should be and could be, and so what implication does that have? What is the implication of businesses that have their own universities and training institutions? And then the third one was to Rick, and because I took the red eye last night, I just forgot what the third part of the
It's about international.
International, thank you. So let me first take to Marilyn.
Thank you. Yes, we have T University, which is our own internal education and training organization for our employees. And we provide a really broad array of coursework for our employees, everything from basic management courses to highly technical courses, and that changes as the needs of our workforce changes. I think that's one of the things we need to worry about in terms of education generally in this country. Technology is changing our jobs, changing the nature of the workforce faster than we can prepare people. So how do you educate and train people for that kind of a workplace? At AT&T, for us, it's ongoing all the time. We can go and take courses for our own edification, to change jobs, to reskill, so that we're competitive within our own workforce. And I think we need to keep up. We talk to other corporations, obviously, who have their own workforce and training programs. I don't know of an association, though, that brings us all together.
Well, I'd just say a couple things about higher education. I think higher education is going to go through enormous transformation in the next few years. The best example, better than MIT making its curriculum available, is 2 Stanford courses in artificial intelligence and database management that were offered to over 100,000 registered students around the world. And all of a sudden you see that, well, maybe we don't monopolize this or it's all here. Part of this is also a story that there are students in other countries that are more hungry than our students, that are out there trying to work harder. That's part of the China-India story. If you go into actually Chinese and Indian schools, a very large proportion of them would be appalling. They're just not at the level of even California schools. But what you see there is with 1.2 to 1.4 billion people, there are a large number that are working very hard on their own to, in fact, get to the point where they can both be at the highest level in their own countries, they can move into U.S. universities, and so forth.
Well, I would like to thank the panelists not only for their contributions today, but the ongoing work that they do on these issues. So please help me in thanking the panelists for this. Or actually, we can stay here and you can talk. So please stay seated. Donna Cooper, who's the co-author of this report from the Center for American Progress.
And thanks, Ann. You did a great job. And thanks to folks. I'll be quite brief. I want to thank you for your participation here today. And hopefully you take this report and help us all raise the flag for the public attention on this issue. When we started to do this report, I remember the first day I walked over to my colleague Adam Hirsch, who's a China expert, and I said to Adam, you know what, I bet we're going to find out that those crazy Chinese over there, they're teaching their kids multiplication before they start school. And I was joking. And only 2 weeks later spoke with experts at Teachers College who pointed out to me that the Chinese had just changed their preschool curricula. They used to teach, the goal was 3-digit multiplication by entry to kindergarten, 3-digit multiplication, but they tested 90,000 pre-K students in China a couple years ago and realized they couldn't do 3 digits, so they're bringing down their standard to 2-digit multiplication by the time you enter kindergarten. So to Rick's point of what middle-class parents know, one of the things that we see around the quality deficits in both India and China is that they are mimicking what middle-class parents know in America need to happen for their children to have the skills to compete in the global economy. And that is one of the points that we make in this report heavily, is we look at the patterns that have served middle-class and upper-class families well in America for decades. And those parents have focused on the early learning of their children. They have focused on volunteering in their children's schools. And they have focused on making sure their children have jobs before they graduate high school so they have some work experience. And the outcome of those patterns of behavior are markedly different for children who have those inputs versus those who don't. And even for poor kids, where they are able to take advantage of early childhood, parental volunteerism, quality schools, and youth employment, they also do better as adults. So it's not a surprise that China and India are mimicking our behavior. What is surprise is the pace at which they're doing this and the scale. So to just echo one point that Ann made, yes, China has 1.1 million students now graduating with STEM degrees. That number will rise dramatically as they get towards their college completion goals over the next 10 years. In India, they have increased in 7 years by 200% the number of STEM graduates, about 220,000 STEM graduates, compared to our 500,000. But in that same 7 years, our number of STEM graduates only grew by 24%. And in fact, last year, in 2010, the number of STEM graduates declined a little bit. So our trajectory of progress may not be anywhere near where we need it to be. So when you think about it, 33 kids, for every 100 kids that enter elementary school, 33 kids in America are graduating from college. And our assumption in this report is that we change that. And not every kid has to go to college, but in order to get a job at AT&T, every kid has to be able to get a post-secondary credential or a degree. And for that reason, we also looked back at American history and we saw that when Ronald Reagan was president, there was a very telling report that was written called A Nation at Risk. And it's kind of frightening that when you read that report, you could be reading about today, because that was a long time ago. And from A Nation at Risk, George Bush, the first George Bush president, brought together the nation's governors for the first education summit. And the goals of that summit remain the goals that we must have today. We have not yet achieved them. And Bill Clinton raised the red flag again with Goals 2000, calling the nation to focus on improving the outcomes of our children. And none of those presidents only did lip service. All of them focused on investments, as did George W. Bush and as has Barack Obama. But what we learned by doing this research was that China and India approach this very differently than us. They have a plan. They don't just have goals, they have a plan. And that plan started in pre-K and it goes through college. How many pre-K slots do I need? How many qualified teachers do I need? How do I get qualified teachers? How do I keep them? How many post-secondary slots will I need if I'm successful all the way up? How many STEM slots will I need? For instance, India is opening 7 more IITs, some of the world's best technology training in the world. 7 more in the next 2 years because they have a plan. And so what our report calls for is for the next president, Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, the next president, to commit to have a new presidential summit on education. And for that presidential summit on education to look specifically at how we create new goals and put plans behind them, how we expand access to early childhood education and ensure that it's high quality, how we ensure that we have high quality teachers in America, and how we ensure that America's competitiveness is advanced by improving the future of our children. The Olympics just ended a week ago, and we won the most gold medals. 4 years ago, China beat us by 11 gold medals. So maybe that's a sign that the U.S. is getting more focused on quality. But we believe here that the competition that really matters is the competition of what happens when children go back to school. And this week and over the next 2 weeks, children are going back to school. And this is a call for the next president to go back to school, take us all back to school, and improve America's competitiveness by improving the outcomes that our schools deliver. So we invite you to be part of that challenge with us, to encourage members of Congress and governors and the next president to lead for America's competitiveness and lead for our children. Thank you very much for coming here today, and thanks to the Center for the Next Generation for being a terrific partner.